Many thanks indeed for joining us, Okubo-san. First of all, the trade figures again are strong yet. How do you look at these numbers as we await them?
Right. I guess if it's going to be a trade deficit over 1 trillion yen, it's going to be the biggest monthly deficit in history, so that says something.
Your biggest concern is muted overseas demand. Exports to the US, EU and China have been falling. That, for you, as you say yourself, is dangerously concerning.
I wouldn't say it's dangerous concerning. Japan, I think, well, what we have to think about is trade deficit a bad thing? Well, not necessarily, I wouldn't say. The reason why Japan is actually having a trade deficit is because Japan is importing that Japan's imports are rising so fast, and why is that? It's because Japanese economy is going to do pretty well because of the reconstruction demand. So trade deficit for this year or next is not necessarily a bad thing.
Look at my research there, and you did say the word dangerous, but you did refer to it. I'm worried about, to use your words, significant downturn in China and the US. Can you explain the sort of linkage to Japan? How damaging would it be, and what do you regard as a significant downturn in the US or indeed in China?
Right. I believe for this year, I think weak external demand, as you mentioned, weak US economy, weak Chinese economy, will actually be Japan can overcome those difficulties because the domestic demand is temporarily being boosted by reconstruction demand. So I don't think just because export is going to decline, Japanese companies are going to fight. There's going to be a lot of unemployment in Japan. I think domestic demand will come in very handy.
The largest trade deficit just been announced on record, Okubo-san, which means good news for the exporter because of the yen.
Yes, indeed, you are perfectly right. You know, trade deficit as I mentioned, trade deficit can be actually a good thing for Japan for many reasons, and one reason is, just you said, if it leads to weak yen, and as it seems that it is doing right now, it's actually great for Japanese exporters, and so that would cushion the weakness in overseas demand.
Are you surprised that it's the largest deficit on record or not?
Not really. You know, last year we had our first deficit in 31 years, and I'm not surprised that this January is actually showing over 1 trillion deficits.
And what's the main cause for this happening?
Well, I would say there are two big causes. One is actually the high energy prices. You know, regardless of the overseas exports performance, it is actually the import growth which is actually pushing up Japanese trade deficit. Last year, in 2011, Japanese import grew by over 7 trillion yen. On the other hand, export fell by just 1.8 trillion yen. So you just see that which was a bigger factor. It's actually the import growth.
Now, the biggest concern for you and for most of Japan is deflation. How worrying is that, and how much difference does these figures make to that scenario?
Right. I think Japanese deflation is kind of perpetual because of the, I would say, bad central bank policies. But weak yen in itself will help Japanese central bank tackle deflation because higher import prices should push up prices in Japan.
So overall, the deficit means a weaker yen, which obviously helps deflation. So overall, this figure really is, if you like, a catalyst for a very far better change of scenario for Japan's economy.
Yes, I would say that. I think there is actually a good momentum in Japan, in the global risk sentiment. People are starting to think that the U.S. economy might actually have a good chance of showing a good recovery this year. Equity prices are rising and yen are falling. I think this momentum is actually pretty good for Japan.
Okubo-san, I must ask as well, do you have full confidence in the Bank of Japan and also clearly in the new government?
You know, I must say I don't. I think Governor Shirakawa-san is actually a great economist, but I think he alone is not actually strong enough to get the market, recover confidence in the BOJ. I think BOJ on itself is relatively a central bank which has a very weak commitment to its inflation targeting.
So for this year going forward again, after the dreadful year your country had last year, how do you see, barring any unfortunate, horrible disasters, how do you see the economy going forward again? You say you're concerned about the government and the Bank of Japan's handling of the situation. What's your biggest concern, therefore? What should be tackled head-on?
I think, well, the biggest concern for Japan and as well as for the world is still going to be Europe. If I think we are seeing that resolvement of the Greek debt problem for today, but then there's Portugal, there's Ireland, and there's Italy. So that global problem is still the biggest problem for Japan. As for Japan's unique factor, I think Japan has already kind of recovered from the damage of the tsunami. So I think that factor is fine. And as for the politics, yes, Japanese politics is still very weak, but that has been the case for the last 10 years, and I don't think that's going to be any particular risk to Japan this year.
Thank you for your time. Okubo-san there joining us from Societe Generale, the chief Japan economist. Many thanks indeed.